Yeah. Thank you so much for telling me about the Hindu temple.
Sure.
Maybe we can move on to another thing that you're part of, the Interfaith Dialogue Association. So, like, maybe can you describe maybe your role with that organization?
Yeah, sure. So, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a grassroots effort for interfaith dialogue here in Grand Rapids. I wasn't a part of it then, but the Interfaith Dialogue Association did charter itself as a nonprofit 501c3. And one of the great things about IDA back then was that most of the major players were not clergy. They were lay people. And I think there were a few clergy members who were involved, but it was by and large, again, grassroots. There was no foundation, there was no college, nothing like that to support IDA. Then I came on board in the early 90s, and how I came on board is I found out that there was a living room discussion group that met once a month. I saw an article in the Grand Rapids Press, and it just appealed to me so much. And it was very diverse. So once a month, people would meet, and if I remember correctly, we had Muslim representation, we had Jewish representation, we had several stripes of Christian representation, obviously. We had, if you're familiar with Baha'i, we had Baha'i representation, and I'm probably forgetting one or two more. But was also nice was that the people within the traditions, like the Christians, came from various movements, right? The Jews who were there, you had liberal, you had conservative. You know, when I joined, there was a Hindu woman, but she was a first generation Indian American Hindu. So we were way different. And not that we disagreed on a lot at all, but just how we lived our lives, etc. She was more traditionally, culturally Indian. And I obviously wasn't. And I really, really loved that. And then somehow I got onto the board. How did that happen? Somebody lost a bet probably, but I got onto the board. And then later on, they asked me to be vice president. There was a vacancy. And I said, wait a minute here. If I'm vice president, doesn't that mean that if Lillian, who is president and a co-founder, doesn't that mean if Lillian ever steps down, I would be president? I don't want to be president. And they go, oh, no. That we wouldn't do that. Absolutely not. Well, that was really interesting because I found out that apparently people of all religions can lie, just lie badly. All of a sudden, Lillian decides she wants to retire and move to Pennsylvania. And guess who's president? And I wasn't happy. Believe me, I was not. But I did decide, you know, somebody's got to do it. Nobody else wanted to. I saw a lot of value. And what's interesting is I had a rather prescient thought, and that is, with Lillian, one of the reasons she was such an effective president is because she was also an academician. She taught at Grand Valley, all right? And I really felt for Interfaith Dialogue to take it to the next level, we really needed somebody connected to academia. I just knew that had to be the case. But we continued to do what we did. We held conferences. We brought speakers in. We facilitated these living room dialogue groups. So we were continuing on, not making a fantastic mark, but still we were a presence. And just before Lillian left, we started a radio show. Are you familiar with we have a radio show?
No, I didn't know about that.
Yeah. Each week I host a program called Common Threads, which is broadcast on WGVU, which is the NPR affiliate out of Grand Valley. So, and that is also a way that Lillian was able to help us. Being an instructor at Grand Valley, she was able to just say, like, we need a radio show.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I'll talk to WGVU. Okay. Well, WGVU says, okay, we can have our radio show. It was almost that simple.
Yeah.
And at the time, here is a fun fact to know and tell. So we needed a host for the show. And my background is in broadcasting. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but it is. I work in media. And so everybody looked to me. Oh, Fred's going to host Common Threads. Fred is not going to host Common Threads. It just sounded like too much like work. But fortunately, at Grand Valley, at WGVU, there was a gentleman who was a producer, and he was not working on the air, but he wanted some on-air experience. And he was a Calvin grad. Huh. And his name was Mark Evan Jackson. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Mark Evan Jackson, because people at Calvin should want to know this. So he graduated Calvin. He was a part of the improv group out of Calvin, and working at WGVU, and he hosted Common Threads, and I helped him find guests. But then he left for Detroit, and he worked for Second City, the comedy troupe. He left Detroit and moved to Los Angeles. And since being in Los Angeles, he became a regular in the latter part of the Parks and Recreation series, and is now on The Good Place.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And is in rehearsal for a movie. Because of COVID, they may have halted production temporarily. But the movie that he is rehearsing for, or was rehearsing for, he would be playing Steve Jobs. Okay, so I'm just assuming that because I'm now hosting Common Threads, that I will have that meteoric career as well. Although I've been doing it now for about 23 years and I haven't had my break, but I'm a patient man. So I just thought you would appreciate the fact that that Interfaith Dialogue Association has a radio program that's been running for, just a second here, about 24 years. It's been running for 24 years, and I've done it for about 23 of those years, and that the former host has reached a rather significant place in Hollywood. He is a working actor, a consistently working actor, and he's a Calvin grad. So cheers to you, Mark Evan Jackson. So yeah, you can look him up on Internet Movie Database. Okay, so, but I digress. But I did want you to know that a part of what we have done at IDA is to have this radio program and to interview people from literally all over the world on a variety of issues related to religion, spirituality, the public square, social issues, politics and religion. We get into all of it. And it's broadcast each week on WGVU, 88.5 FM. It airs at it airs at 7 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and then it's repeated, the same episode, at 6:30 that night. And it's also available as a podcast. So if you, anybody is interested, if you just Google, you can go to iTunes, you can go to Google, a number of platforms, and the full name of the show is Common Threads, an Interfaith Dialogue. If you just put in Common Threads in any podcast platform, you will get a show about knitting, and I'm not kidding you. I do not host a show on knitting. That's not me. They probably make a lot more money than I do. But there you go. But back to the history. So this is the important part. Mm-hmm. Remember what I said about the idea of having somebody academically connected to lead IDA? Well, about 10 years ago, there was another interfaith effort going on in Muskegon simultaneously with what IDA was doing in Grand Rapids. And that interfaith effort was spearheaded by a woman named Sylvia Kaufman. And Sylvia, part of a very successful business family, she and her husband decided at one point that this interfaith effort of theirs in Muskegon should be housed at Grand Valley. So she approached Grand Valley and said, I would like to start the Kaufman Interfaith Institute. And here's an endowment, $1 million or so, whatever it was. And one of the professors at Grand Valley took over as executive director of the Kaufman Interfaith Institute. He reached out to me because he knew of IDA's work and he wanted to collaborate. Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely, I'm all about collaboration. So we started collaborating on a few different things, and then a few more things, and a few more things, and finally, basically, I called up Doug one time a few years ago, and I said, Doug, you know, we've been shacking up for so long, let's get married. And he accepted my proposal. So what happened was we agreed on the kind of merger where IDA would become a part of the Kaufman Interfaith Institute without dissolving it. Because, right, a lot of times when you have mergers, Company A just sort of digests Company B, and there is no more Company B. But Interfaith Dialogue Association does still exist. We have our own little niche in the Kaufman family, if you will. We are a program affiliate of Kaufman. But this relationship was able to take us to that level that I dreamed of multiple years prior when I became president, because I do not have the academic credentials that are needed, I think, to push it forward. And now we have the backing of Grand Valley State University. Okay, so I'm thrilled with the kinds of things that we've done. And I know you're familiar with Kaufman, right? You know that Kaufman and Calvin and the other colleges have partnered on a number of different activities. And you know, there's a real interfaith presence at Calvin, at Grand Valley, at Aquinas, and much of it has been due to our outreach. So that's where IDA is, that's where we were, and that's where we are right now.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Is there any other big, you mentioned Common Threads, which I'm excited about. I'm a big podcast person, so I'll definitely have to check that out.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Are there any other major projects or things that you guys are doing right now?
Well, obviously, because of COVID, there have been significant challenges. But what I would recommend people to do is, if you are interested in interfaith matters, to contact Kaufman. The website is real easy, interfaithunderstanding.org. Interfaithunderstanding.org. And we have a bulletin that goes out every Tuesday called the Interfaith Inform. And that will tell you what's happening. Now, again, not a lot, but there are a few Zoom-based activities that go on from here to there. I know we still have our book club going on, and as I'm sure as soon as we have the pandemic behind us, we're going to be going absolutely full tilt. Let me just say, in the last couple of, well, I'm going to go back even further. In 2011, we got the idea to do something that has never been done in the history of human civilization. Seriously. And this is for a city to proclaim a full year of interfaith engagement. So we spoke to the mayor at the time, who was George Hartwell, a very, very progressive gentleman. And we basically said, would you be willing to issue a mayoral proclamation that 2012 would be the year of interfaith understanding in Grand Rapids? And he said yes. So that full year, from January to December, we organized somewhere between, well, no, wait, let me rephrase it ever so slightly to say we organized. There were over 200 interfaith-oriented events in that year. Now, the reason I changed we sponsored or something to there were is because we did not want to be the single fountain that would produce all of this. We challenged the churches and mosques and synagogues, find out what you can do. And we went a step further, and we approached secular institutions in this area, such as the Art Institute, the Art Museum, rather, the Public Museum, local live theater companies, and the Grand Rapids Symphony. Because what we were saying is, we know you're secular. We know religion isn't your business. But all of you, in your own way, you understand how much religion is a motivator in human history, right? So we asked them, what can you do that would encourage this year of interfaith understanding? So a perfect example would be the Public Museum. All of a sudden they thought, and they said, you know what? If you go to the Public Museum, you will find so much of the migration history, who came from where, and artifacts. And so, for instance, you have the vast Dutch migration. Well, how can you talk about the Dutch migration into Western Michigan without bringing up religion? It would be virtually impossible if you were going to be honest. So you have artifacts there, right? You might have Bibles on display there, or pictures of old churches or whatever. And then you have the sacred artifacts of the Indians, the first people here. And then the big Polish wave with the Catholics and all of that. So you have all of these different things in different parts of the museum. They started a multi-faith tour for people. Like, see how religion affected West Michigan. So groups would make reservations, and you would have a docent or somebody at the museum lead you from display to display and explain the religious significance of these various artifacts. Perfect. The Grand Rapids Symphony decided to put a concert on its agenda, and it was a particular piece, a modern piece, that was written in honor of what is called Nostra Aetate. I don't suppose that means anything to you, does it?
No.
Nostra Aetate is Latin for in our time. And it is the name of the document that the Catholic Church produced in the mid-60s that publicly agreed that the Jews did not kill Jesus and should not suffer anti-Semitism. That was a big deal, obviously, when that happened. So this classical piece was written in honor of that achievement, and the symphony performed it that year. Okay, so I mean, we had discussion groups, we had films that people would watch together. One of the biggest walks on the wild side, can you imagine? And it's one of my favorite things. We had this idea where Christian churches would invite clergy from other religions to actually give a sermon at their Sunday service. But also, they would have to use the readings of the lectionary for that Sunday as a springboard for what they were going to talk about. Okay? So they would have to reflect on the gospel, even though that's not their gospel. So for instance, I mean, if the reading for that week was, no man cometh unto the Father but through me, if a Jew was giving that sermon, he would have to simply say, well, we don't believe that. Right. Okay, but quite frankly, from what I remember, none of the readings from the scriptures were so stark that the people who were giving those sermons just had to throw up their hands and say, well, no, that's nonsense as far as we're concerned. It didn't happen. I did it. I gave the sermon for a Methodist church, and I was very, very easily able to take the gospel and the Old Testament reading and whatever and weave something that resonated with Hindu thought. It wasn't that hard. Obviously, very few churches took us up on that, but at least a few did, and it was amazing. Now, there's more I could say about that, but let's move on. So that was 2012. We thought, well, we can't just end things there. So 2015, we had a couple of years to prepare. 2015 was the year of interfaith service. So we thought to ourselves, how great would it be because all religions encourage service to those in need, right? How great would it be if we actually collaborated? So instead of just the Christian churches feeding the poor, everybody would feed the poor, and we'd make up different teams. And so that was a thing. We actually teamed up. For instance, Habitat for Humanity. We did Interfaith Build. Okay, I know. With the first time they came to me, and they said, we have this idea for an interfaith build, and I said, okay, let me understand. You're going to get all of these different people together in one place who disagree about religion, and you're going to give them hammers? So, but my fear was unfounded. No, it worked out wonderfully, just wonderfully to come to a build, and there were people from the synagogue, there were people from the mosque, whatever it was. It was great. So we did that. There was a Calvin, you've got that creek, I believe it's Plaster Creek that runs right behind you.
Yeah.
So in 2015, it also runs behind one of the mosques on East Paris. So there was a river cleanup day And the mosque and Calvin partnered on that. So you had people from both communities working to clean up the Plaster Creek. And you know, people loved it. You know, I heard, and I don't know, I heard that a few Muslims got splashed and they thought that they were being baptized, but that was the only complaint that I heard of. So let's fast forward to 2015. 2018, we decided to make the year of interfaith friendship, because that's really where the rubber meets the road, when people actually can become friends and accept one another regardless of religious convictions. And so we organized all sorts of different things, an interfaith movie club, an interfaith cooking club, interfaith knitting club, a interfaith meditation. I was very active in that, interfaith meditation. And boy, there were book clubs, okay? And I'm sure I'm probably forgetting about 5 or 6 of all of these, seriously, all of these different things. And this is continued. It's not like, oh, it's New Year's Day, 2019, let's forget about all this. It is still continuing. The only thing that we didn't have, all of these had the backing of a citywide proclamation. That's what made it really special, all right? And so I'm really, really proud to have been a very small part in all of these efforts that, by most accounts, were quite successful.
Yeah, that's incredible. Maybe just to close off this section, maybe you could talk about, why do you think it's important for interfaith work to happen in Grand Rapids? Is there any, yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you why. 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, the average Christian, because obviously it's a Christian majority country, had very little understanding of people over there. The Muslims, the Hindus, the Buddhists. All they knew was that a few times a year they'd give a little extra money at church, and hopefully there'd be a little fewer Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists over there, that a church would be planted, and that was it. And of course, the understanding of the religions was very poor. There was very, very little literacy. You know, if you were to ask in Grand Rapids, now, and let's not pick on Grand Rapids. I mean, come on, Fort Wayne. No, I mean, just any city, unless it was in a really metropolitan area like perhaps New York City. Okay. But if you were to ask, what do Muslims believe? What do Hindus believe? Chances are you'd get a bit of nonsense thrown into whatever, you know, they might be right on a couple of things, but really, really wrong on another. Well, now those people who were over there are over here. And they are our neighbors. They are our physicians. They are our instructors in colleges, in high schools. And sometimes they become members of our family. Right? And isn't it good to have an understanding of who they are? And we're very, very clear. You know, interfaith can mean different things to different people. And to some people, it means we're all one and all religions are the same. Well, that's nonsense. All religions aren't the same. But the good news is, even though, I mean, my understanding of, say, the afterlife can be drastically different from your understanding of the afterlife. But our understandings, for the most part, of what's right and wrong are really, really close to identical. Okay. Maybe you wouldn't accept cuts in line at the Hindu temple. Okay, Mr. Holier Than Thou, fine, be like that. But other than that, I am sure that we agree our stands on stealing, on murder, on adultery. All of that is the same. And I like to point out that religion can be divided into two elements: the transcendent and the mundane. So the transcendent is all of that which we usually believe in salvation through the cross, believe in rebirth, believe in some form of ultimate reward. And that's where we completely are on opposite sides, right? But the mundane, the moral codes of religion, the positive effects of community. As you probably know, people who attend religious services actually can be healthier than people who don't. And that doesn't matter whether you go to a church, a synagogue, or a mosque, right? It's that community that's so powerful. So that's the mundane. The mundane would be the moral codes. The mundane would be anything that is external to religion, the comfort that it brings, all of that. Well, it's funny, we tend to argue about the transcendent. And what all of these transcendental elements have in common is that they are unprovable, right? They are matters of faith. So why bother arguing about those things? Now, we can certainly discuss, absolutely. I would have no problem taking the stage with a Christian and just explaining, say, Hindu eschatology versus Christian eschatology, or something like that. Not a problem. But I wouldn't make any attempt to persuade somebody to my point of view. And since I have no proof, what have I got to go into with? The only time you can argue something in religion, I think that if you both agree on a foundational truth. So for instance, you could argue with another Christian that Jesus was born in Bethlehem as opposed to Samaria or something. Right? Okay. You could make that claim and say, well, no, it says right here, da da da. But other than that, it's you take your best guess. So the point of interfaith, the way I see it, is let us concentrate on the mundane, because you can't prove the transcendent, and why not work together for those things that we can work towards, the most important elements of a healthy society, to give people meaning, to do our best to eliminate poverty, and advance education. Those are the things that matter to me. And I understand that, again, people can enter into interfaith on one level or another. So for instance, somebody watching this video, if all they're interested in is learning about Hinduism, that's fine, right? That's the one level. Now there are other levels. And so for instance, coming up in a couple of weeks from the time I'm speaking to you now, we're going to have our annual Interfaith Thanksgiving service. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I fully understand and respect the fact that some people subscribe to a theology that would not let them attend that. Okay. And we're not trying to, again, make it look like all religions are the same for this. We're actually pointing out our differences, okay, in this. But the one thing that all religions have in common is a sense of gratitude. There is no religion that does not have gratitude, okay? So we get together and we share those prayers and hymns and teachings of gratitude. So, for instance, if you were to, I'm not going to present this year, but I have on many occasions, and oftentimes I will be leading a chant. We do not ask you to accompany me on that chant if it is not your theology. And I never, ever would want somebody to actually, it's funny, I did a chant, and I normally do them in English as opposed to Sanskrit because I want people to understand what it is they're saying. And afterwards, we have a little social, and this guy said to me, comes up to me, he says, I really, really appreciated your chant, and my minister was sitting next to me, and I asked him if it was okay if I enjoyed this. It's like, well, I'm glad you asked him permission. That's okay. But even though we're not asking, say you, if you were to come, we're not asking you to pray along with the Muslim or pray along with the Jew. If you only want to pray along with actually participate with the Christians, that's fine. But isn't it wonderful for you to be able to see, well, how would a Muslim do this? How would a Jew do this? React to gratitude, and that's what we do. I once, on my radio program, I interviewed a woman from an interfaith organization in New York City. Now, one of the issues with interfaith is they tend to attract the most liberal people, and conservative people, not so much. Part of it is due to lack of interest, but part of it is due to the stereotype that if I involve myself in interfaith, I'm saying that all religions are alike. Okay, so we were having this conversation on the radio, and I asked her, I said, you know, it is a shame that we can't get more conservative, in particular conservative Christians, to join interfaith activities. And I asked her, I said, you know, would you have any problem with somebody coming in who wants to participate with you, but his conviction was Jesus is the only way to salvation? And her response was, well, I hope what he would say is, Jesus is the only way for me. And I went like, no. That does not compute. People who believe Jesus is the only way believe Jesus is the only way for everyone. And unless you accept somebody coming into your circle and saying that, then you're closing yourself off. Those people will not come if they think that they're going to be treated like that. If I'm not asked in any way to compromise my theology, that person should not compromise his or her theology either. And I have absolutely no problem engaging with people who hold that view. Okay, and I believe because of the suspicion that conservative Christians have of interfaith, I think we need to go far beyond where we are to make sure they know, okay, this is what you're getting yourself into if you join our merry band, but you're not going to be asked to compromise your theology. And if you want to believe that everybody else in this room, besides fellow Christians, is going to suffer eternal perdition, you are welcome to that thought. Because we're not interested Again, that's the transcendent. We care what I would care if I was having a dialogue with somebody with that point of view is, how did you come to that? What does it mean to you? What is the history of that? And that's it. Okay. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Maybe just to close off our discussion, I was wondering if you could comment on like any interactions that you've had with Calvin students in the past, whether that be positive or negative. And then kind of following that, like, what do you think, if you could say anything to Calvin students, either about Hinduism or interfaith work, Calvin students particularly, do you have anything to say to them?
Okay. I notice at Calvin that there's this motivation to sort of widen the circle to include people of other faiths as students, right? Am I correct that the administration is thinking that way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the administration exactly is thinking. I would love to have more students. Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what the administration would say though.
I was told that was an actual goal of the administration to bring in more students, more non-Christian students. Okay. And so I posed the question back to some people in administration of, wouldn't it be easier to help the Christian students who are already there convert to other religions? That would, they didn't go, no, I didn't do that. Anyway, okay, to answer your question, my association with Calvin students has been extraordinarily positive. I mentioned that I've hosted student groups from Calvin, among the other colleges as well, at the temple multiple times. I always I gauge the experience for me. Is it a positive experience and not so positive? By the level of questions, by both the number of questions and the quality of questions. And I would say, by and large, Calvin scores really well on both levels. People, when they come to the temple, they're engaged. I gather that they're interested. And the questions they ask of me are well thought out. And I know that, every once in a while they're preceded by, I know this will probably sound like a stupid question. And you know something, very, very rarely as it is. Actually, I don't know of any stupid questions, not really, no. I'll tell you this, thinking back, Calvin is one of the reasons that I actually moved into this position that evolved into being a pracharak. Tell you what it was. Your January series is remarkable. And in a previous incarnation, when my schedule is more flexible, I went to a bunch of January series lectures. I really did. I look so forward to it. And I don't like to live in a bubble. I like to expose myself to a variety of viewpoints. It's really interesting that this one time, and I'm thinking that it was the late 80s, early 90s. I went to 2 lectures in one January, where both times Hinduism and Eastern thought in general was really slandered by the speaker. Okay. And it was one of these things where they said something that was patently wrong. And I just didn't feel like getting into it in the Q&A because I just didn't. But I walked out of there and my blood pressure, which is usually mellow, was a few points above. And that motivated me. I went home and I wrote a letter and then Xeroxed it off 20 times, made several copies. And I sent it to schools around the area asking if they had a world religions class and they needed speakers on Hinduism, that I would be happy to come to class. And I'm sure I sent one to Calvin, to Aquinas, to all these different places. And that is where I got my first gig. My first gig was East Kentwood High School. And I was terrible. I was so bad, but it got me going. It got me going. And it was attending those two lectures and seeing misinformation so blatantly broadcast that I sensed a bit of frustration. And from that point, I kind of got on the circuit where schools would invite me. And that is one of the things that the temple was attracted to. They knew that I did this, right? And so there you go. There was only one, to the best of my knowledge, one interaction with a Calvin student. And this goes back again to the early 90s, probably. It was way, a long time ago. A young lady called me up, a student, and she was in charge of getting speakers for her class, which I'm assuming was on world religions. And so I went there, and I remember the professor was just outstandingly hospitable to me, and the class was engaged, all right? And I specifically remember one young lady in the class who somebody was saying, I can't remember what spurred her to say this, but she said it in a rather indignant manner. She said, I have neighbors on my block who are Hindu, and they're more Christian than the Christians. Okay. I mean, I think you understand what that really means, right? She wasn't talking theologically. She was talking about how to treat other people. But then I said something, and the professor wanted some confirmation on it. And I said, I will get you, I don't have that with me, but I will get you that confirmation, all right? And so I went home and I looked it up, found a reference that I could give to him so he could take it however far he wanted to, and looking it up himself. So I didn't have his contact information or anything. So I called the woman, the student who originally asked me to come in. And she would not even talk to me. She said that what I was saying in class was absolute heresy, and it was terrible, and that she would not relate that piece of information to the professor. That is the only time I had what I would consider a negative experience with a Calvin student. I can't think of anything else, no. So there you go. I good marks all around. I thoroughly. Were you there at the Sacred Food event last year?
I don't think last year. Not when you spoke. I think I was the one before that, but I don't think I was at that one.
Okay. Again, just a great time. And I look. Oh, I was at Calvin. You know what? The first lecture I gave since COVID was going on 2 months ago. So this is November, and I did this in maybe it was in October or September. I had not done anything outside of a Zoom-like platform all these months. And I was thrilled to get in front of people. And even though it was wearing a mask, and after speaking for 2 hours in a mask, I have now just this tremendous respect for instructors that I've always had great respect, but it's kicked up a notch, because that is astounding to have to talk so consistently in a mask like that. But I did it, and again, a great exchange. People who were engaged, people who asked thoughtful questions, challenging questions. Yeah, that's what I love. I love specifically challenging questions. I love questions. I think anybody who lectures on any subject, if they don't just seek out practically challenging questions, they're not worth listening to.
Yeah.
And I even gave the disclaimer at the beginning, which I always do, is I say, ask me anything, and if I don't know the answer, I promise you I will do my very best to make up something, and you'll never know the difference. But I don't really do that, okay? I don't really do that. So there you go.
Sweet. Yeah, well, thank you so much for talking to me, and for your time and for your wisdom and your knowledge both about Hinduism and the Interfaith Dialogue Association. This has been great.
My pleasure, Ben. Thank you much. And here's to you, Alvin, you.